Okay, hopefully we're good to go. So thanks for waiting for me while I got a few technical things done. I'll breeze through some of the content just to make sure we get to the nub of it now. So thanks for joining in. I'm Perry from an HR background. So you see me on screen there, and I'm going to talk about internal comms and HR in the era of Agile, something I'm spending quite a lot of time on latterly with clients and with colleagues and connections. So just a tiny bit about me. I operate in HR, but I do a lot of what I can only describe as more sort of alternative and experimental versions of the world of work. So I do a bit of academic stuff as well. So I won't dwell on all that stuff about me. You can jump on YouTube and find a bit more about me or LinkedIn. But I wanted to start with a little bit of a mantra that I think I am subscribing to, which I get a lot more feelings from people around the business world, is that now I think we're in an era where people want a lot more meaning and purpose from the work they do. So better business for a better world seems to be the kind of mantra that suits the 21st century's impending sort of third decade. So I'll use that as just a wraparound. The kind of work I do is, like I say, it's HR, but it's more akin to these words here. That is organization design thinking, effectiveness of an organization, lots more human-centered and systems thinking work going on, and as I mentioned, Agile and being inclusive. And I wrapped all that up in a book I wrote in 2017, so a bit of a shameless plug for Transformational HR, where I did talk about what I think is next for HR as its kind of progression. And, for a lot of the things I think I've shared about HR within that book, I think there's equally quite a lot applicable to the internal comms community and its role in helping organizations and people get the best from their work. And these are the people who I work with. So a range of organizations, from housing to banking to retail to technology to energy to all sorts. So I get about a bit and have a nice varied client base. But I wanted to talk about Agile, and McKinsey as a company in terms of research have done quite a bit of looking into this over the last couple of years. That the Agile, I guess you'd say, sort of methodology has grown from just technologists and building apps and developing platforms into businesses that are much more agile. And when they researched into why companies were adopting Agile as a sort of operating principle, they found this, that acceleration of innovation was stark, sort of 80% quicker by companies who adopted an Agile approach versus companies who would be operating in much more traditional sort of functional areas. So something's in this about pace and speed. And while I think about it, pace and speed, I'll probably go quite quickly through this presentation. So if you've got any questions, you can drop in the IC chat cafe and I'll pop in there and answer them with pleasure. And I guess I'm really interested in the dynamics of how an organization is designed. And so that's where, again, Deloitte Human Capital Research has kind of confirmed something I've been seeing and sensing and suspecting for quite some time, is that the shape of an organization is no longer, and perhaps has never been, determined by the organizational chart and the hierarchical structure and flow. It might feel like that, but I think we're starting to see teams being much more assembled around issues, problems, opportunities. So we're moving from what's on the left side of the screen as you're looking at it, the sort of formal structure with people in divisional areas determining their speciality in their work they do, to much more on the right-hand side, where we see people who come together with different disciplines but are determined collectively to solve problems and capitalize on opportunities. So I think there's something in that. There's something in the fact that we're disassembling that sort of rigid structure to go into more flexible. Often people call it team of teams. And within that, of course, there's a whole different dynamic around internal communications, because I guess the previous methodology of start at the top and cascade down might be challenged somewhat by the fact that people aren't in those sort of funnels anymore. They're moving into these more sort of amorphous and nimble teams that are set aside from those divisions and structures. So we've really got to talk to people at an individual level, I think, as a first point of call, rather than rely on the sort of traditional cascade through management lines and so on. But we've known about this kind of impending, I suppose, method of operating being something that people are motivated towards, since Dan Pink did his legendary sort of amalgamation of research around motivation and came up with his drive concept, both his book and his TED Talk and his RSA Animate. And the three things that drove people once money was not necessarily an object of desire anymore is this sense of autonomy, the ability to direct themselves, mastery to get good at things, and purpose to connect to something that's of a higher plateau and plane than perhaps the transactional work that they're engaged in. And so these three things have been around for quite some time, and I guess are probably amplified now in the nature of work being very flexible and responsive. We need people to take more responsibility and accountability. We need people who can get really good at a number of different things and not just say, no, that's not my job. And we need a lot of people who can also connect into something which is the pursuit of customer excellence, or serving people in sort of health and social care, and connecting to that purpose. And so I think this gives us a chance to look at the social construct of work. And internal comms as a profession has been one of the most advanced, I guess, in utilizing things like technology as a connecting vehicle and to share and disseminate and create information. And so Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson's work on machine platform crowd kind of resonates with me here, in that we use machinery, we have platforms where people connect, and we look at people in that sense as a crowd. So that's our digital form of social technologies, but I want to take us to the analog version of that. So people, without the sort of digital infrastructure to connect them, still have this machine platform crowd mantra in the way they operate. So this again is where internal comms and I think in HR are trying to navigate through and capitalize on and connect to. So our machinery is our purpose, customs and protocols, the things that kind of bind us. Our platform is where we go to connect and hang out with others, companies, cooperatives and communities. And our crowd are the people who we work very closely with, people who are perhaps a little bit more distant and infrequent, and people who bring people together episodically or thematically to solve those problems, as I mentioned earlier. And so that links to a little bit of, I guess I'd call it sort of anthropological science, really. When we look at how the planet and people and natural systems have adapted. And so I'm interested in this concept, natural adaptive systems, which I think we're seeing a lot more of. I think we've been in an industrial engineering mindset for a couple of hundred years, and we're now starting to see a lot more of the liberated force of fluidity and perhaps even randomness and chaos that is helping people gain competitive advantage or create fulfilling careers. And so this is all capitalized and captured in a concept called spiral dynamics, which comes from a cyclical emergent theory of the 1950s, which looked at human evolution, particularly when we're collective and we're put to work, as something that has quite a lot of hallmarks that we would look at through our history and recognize the shifts in the way that we've connected, from foragers to tribal sort of constructs into more institutions like academia and religions and military and monarchies, into the industrial era, which I guess we would all recognize we're still in, but moving through that into something a little bit more purpose-led, a little bit more spiritual, a little bit more dynamic in that respect. And even further than that, perhaps some state of nirvana, some state of complete and utter one with the universe, as some aspirational element. And whilst that's a progression, I think we would recognize that there are still these kind of social constructs, these social technologies still in existence. So just because we don't have to live like tribes doesn't mean that we don't, because if you're in a drug cartel or if you're in some kind of terrorist rebellion, you'll probably have a very tribal structure. So we're seeing our mental state, I guess, go from being reactive to being aggressive, to playing politics, to developing strategies, to then getting a bit more about being inspiring and being enlightening. And these are the sort of leadership traits, I guess, we could then overlay into this social construct through the ages. And just how much, I guess, we're now looking to leaders to not just create strategies for us, but inspire us and enlighten us to do those amazing things that we feel are part of our purpose. And so I guess we've moved from the power game, where I guess leaders were in command and control, through to what I've coined the influence game, where we are perhaps less in command, but can shape and direct and steer and facilitate the efforts of lots of enlightened individuals who want to do great things. So we're seeing leaders go from dominators to coaches. And I think there's something interesting in the internal comms that comes from that, where in a dominator game, it is quite literally that the internal communication is largely leader-led propaganda, very sort of directive by leaders and very tightly defined by them. Whereas if the leaders are much more in the coaching mindset, then this is much more conversational, dialogic, inclusive, much more questioning rather than directing and dictating. So I think we're seeing that dynamic come through in the way that organizations are jumping on wikis and social platforms, and that chief execs are blogging and creating video diaries and wanting to engage in conversations with their team. So I think we are seeing a progression through that evolutionary scale, I guess, into how internal comms is also conducted. And our business models are themselves being sort of thrown into some form of slightly disarray and connected in a different sense. As a result of this, we're seeing those unicorns and fast developing companies who are hitting billion-dollar valuations, who operate much more on the right-hand side and less on the left-hand side. And so again, the mechanism for internal communications isn't through hierarchical, performance-led reporting, but much more about connectedness, about transformative purpose, about talking to people on a very individual level. So I think we see this a lot. So how does this manifest itself? That's the theory. What does it look like in practice? So for the last part of this presentation, I wanted to give you some very succinct but nonetheless hopefully enlightening examples of how HR, leadership, internal comms combine really to create this more dynamic and agile sort of workplace methodology. And the first is a company in the Netherlands called Buurtzorg. That's the chief exec there, Jos de Blok. So his philosophy is to create teams of autonomous and independent nurses who are connected by social technologies and each other. He's very democratic in his decision making. There is definitely something about his approach as being very much, you help direct me to what you need the organization to do. And as a result, it's the highest ranked employer in the Netherlands for the last few years, and has record levels of patient satisfaction for its home-based nursing. So internal comms and leadership there is very much distributed, very much connected in those small groups, and very much helping people make the decisions that shape the organization. And then on to an energy company called OVO. And so in a fast growth environment, what OVO have managed to do is connect internal comms, initiatives and innovation, accountability and openness in a platform they built to help people create a project, to build a team around it, to connect it to overall purpose, and to almost broadcast it or allow it to be reviewed by anybody in the organization who has either an interest, avoid duplication, and can work in that very much out loud, agile, and very sort of open way. And that's helped them become a real standout organization in how quickly they can respond to market. This is a tech company in Michigan called Menlo, Menlo Innovations. Their unique internal communication approach is called high-speed voice technology, which is talking. They work in pairs, so instantly there's connections between people. They have regular stand-ups. They will all share and communicate verbally about what's going on. They operate a board at the back of the room with their tasks. But this is a highly, highly communicative environment where people take responsibility and share with each other and don't need managerial protocols. In fact, this is an organization that has no managers, has no HR. It's a 90 people organization, so it's quite easy to get round to everybody. But really interesting that their dynamic for comms starts with pair working and then forms into teams and the overall organization. And then, of course, we've heard about Spotify and its legendary squad working and how quickly they've been able to mobilize to create new products. And again, internal communication in Spotify is a mixture of important corporate information, but also working in this format with tribes, chapters, guilds, and squads. So you've almost got 4 layers of communication running through Spotify. And then that was an approach taken by a client of mine at Salford City Council, who worked in a very squad-like sense. Debbie Brown and Sam Betts in the middle of the picture at the bottom there wanted to create more autonomy and more bottom-up innovation. And so the communication methods for that were that people would connect in across the whole organization, would bring squads of people together to create new digital services for the citizens of Salford, and have stand-ups and show and tells and all sorts of open dynamics where people could critique each other's work, and delivered some fantastic things in around 3 months to become Digital Council of the Year last year. Hire is a Chinese white goods manufacturer where Zhang Rumin, who's the chief exec there, has again taken a sort of networked team of teams approach. So again, internal comms within that environment, and particularly HR in that environment, is a service provider who will work alongside these small teams and help connect messaging across the organization while they're working as independent units, driving, I guess, overall sort of brand presence and market capability. And then an engineering company in the US called Barry Waymiller, who is run on a family basis, a very principled organization that talks about connectedness and camaraderie and looking after each other. And again, internal comms in that organization is an incredibly sort of fluid entity and highly participative, to the point that lots of people who work at Barry Waymiller will talk about the essence that it feels like there's always a listening ear. It doesn't feel like anything's hidden. They're very open about recovery from challenges like lost accounts, and a very inclusive environment for how internal comms flows up and through and across the organization. And then Tangerine, a bank in Canada, which runs very much on what I guess you would call smart swarming techniques. So if there's any huge projects that are happening in the bank, everybody from different parts of the organization drops tools, goes to swarm to that work, all attack the work and sort of get it done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And comms is very much like that across Tangerine as well. Lots and lots of very active, open and highly creative comms that keeps everybody connected to what Tangerine's all about as a forward-looking, pioneering kind of challenger bank before I think even the phrase was talked about. And then some work I've done with guys at St Thomas's, particularly in the HR team, again, inviting people to participate in projects which are passionate for them and that help the organisation be more diverse, inclusive, spot talent and create new initiatives. And again, comms is very much across and through and not just up and down. And there's tons more. So there's lots of companies who I think are adopting new working methods, employee ownership, flat structures, holacracy, team of teams, and largely what they're doing is trying to create a different dynamic so that people are more connected to each other and to the work that they're doing. So I'm watching out for these kinds of companies and on the lookout for new ones all the time who are rule breakers, who don't necessarily have conforming HR and don't have predictable kind of comms. So plenty of organizations that you may not have heard of varying sizes and varying market sectors who are doing some really interesting things in the way that they connect and engage with their audiences. So what about it? Leadership. So I think it's more about responsiveness. So I think leadership, HR and internal comms is almost like a triangulation to respond to the needs of people in how work and communication is designed. So I think we can help not only communicate messages, but help have designed interventions and support through an engaged enabling comms function. And then also more agile ways to lead business transformation. I think it's gone are the days where you'd set up a transformation team. And I think now it's more this cross-functional, almost volunteer-led activists and enthusiasts who want to come together. And so for HR and internal comms, there's a really strong need to connect in with those, even if we're not present. Just to understand the nature of where people's interests are, how to communicate that across the business, and make sure that we're all connected and we're all pulsating along with those enthusiasts. I've created a different model for HR to try and accommodate some of that, change some of the language, and given it more of a sense of fluidity rather than sort of rigidity of like functions or divisions. And certainly there are a number of different ways that I think HR and internal comms can collaborate, both on transformation things, on performance and development, on strategy and creating connections and partnerships. So I think there are now more opportunities for HR and internal comms, I think, to collaborate on what could only describe as those sort of pioneering initiatives. And so overall, what would I say we could look forward to within particularly internal comms and HR together? I think much more about adaptation, so design for agility. So no convulsive restructures, no lumbering behemoths of campaigns, but agile, sensory, adjusting methods to work. Leveraging digital to its full extent, not just expecting people to deal with the sort of digital tsunami of content, but creating the right connections, the right tools, and meeting people where they want to be communicated and engaged. Being creative, of course. I think the questions that we are facing in the 21st century are probably new, unique, and different, and would need very much more about creative solutions. And again, I see lots of points where HR and IC can collaborate much more creatively. But ultimately, I think it's about that better business for a better world, being fair, open, and inclusive, and not just talking about company performance from a profit sense, but talking about company performance from a well-being, sustainability, community, and all those other touch points. So I think fairness has a number of different guises. And so I'll just remind you in sort of a thought leader, I guess, context, really, Melvin Conway's work from 1968. And it's an interesting thing for me because I'm in organization design quite a lot. And I guess if I pay attention to how communication flows, that pretty much gives me the schema of the organization. So I think there's a lot of connecting points between organization design professionals and internal comms professionals to work with that energy and flow and understand perhaps what an optimal organizational structure like, because the comms and the channels pretty much are directing how that looks and feels. And so that's it from me. So thank you for listening. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this and bringing a bit of HR and a little bit of anthropology and perhaps some human behavioral science into the mix here. But I see some really exciting opportunities to channel and change the way we do comms and HR activities by being more agile and by understanding what agility really means, and hopefully creating a much more exciting and connected and inclusive world for the people who are doing all that sort of great work for us. So thanks very much for that. Like I say, I'm happy to jump on some chats in the chat room because there's probably some questions that you might want answered, but thanks for paying attention and enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for being part of this super conference. Thanks.